Happy Hiberknitalong season! Today is the day we get to cast on and start knitting the Aurora cabin shawl. So I wanted to give you some of my shawl tips to knit this shawl and give you some color placement advice and just get you inspired and excited to start knitting along. So it's been a couple months since the mystery knit along, and now we're in those colder winter months. So I hope you can sneak some real cozy quality time of knitting, having some alone time. It's always a busy time around the new year, so I hope you get a little bit of peace and quiet, and you can use your knitting and this knit along as an excuse and yeah, to get your alone time. So you need to count, you gotta work on those colors and get those beautiful colors arranged in the slip stitch pattern. And I arranged and designed this shawl to have some really fun, exciting sections like that slip stitch motif. And I developed those little traveling cables. So definitely make sure you watch the video linked in the pattern. So there's a video linked in the pattern where I show you how to stripe the colors together and some yarn management advice. So make sure you watch that. And there's also a cast on tutorial linked in the pattern. So each part you reach in the pattern, there's a separate video I included for those techniques. But it's a little bit more involved with those 5 colors striped together in this section, but then you always get a relief. After every multicolor section, there's a 2-color section that's much simpler and more easy to focus on. So pay a little bit more attention in those 5-color slip stitch moments, but with the garter ridges and the other slip stitch sections, you can memorize those pattern repeats, and those are definitely more TV knitting, or you're with your family, or if you just don't want to follow the pattern as much, you can memorize those. So not as distracting, those sections, but these sections definitely have a little bit of alone time to start those setup rows to make sure you've got your stitches slipped in the right place. But I can't wait to see what colors you're putting together, and if you've got the original color palettes that we sent you with your kits. I can't wait to see that progress. So make sure you share photos in the Ravelry group. There's an HKAL 2023 Ravelry group, or it's HKAL 2022 Ravelry group, where we share all our progress, so you can post your photos in that thread. And I want to see, like, even the same colors, but when they're used in different arrangements. Like, you don't have to do the same color A that I did, but I think it's going to look really cool no matter what kind of color placement you choose. But a couple of the most important colors are the border. So you might want to think ahead with your color placement. Okay, I see that all the colors are dancing around everywhere, but what do I want my final border to be? I used a turquoise and a really bright purple, so that was color B and color D of my color palette for the border. Colors B and D are the chevron border, so maybe think, what 2 colors do I want to see together for the border? That's going to be colors B and colors D. And that final bind-off color, I used color C. So color C is the final bind-off, and it uses a lot of yarn at the end, so you want to make sure if you're placing your colors in your palette that you don't switch around your colors too much. And by that I mean, don't say that color B is your purple and then later decide that color B is your yellow, because you might use too much yarn. So when you choose colors A, B, C, D, E, stick with those color placements and all the way to the end. So color B and D are the chevrons, and color C is that I-cord bind off. So I think that's the most important place to start, and then just place the other colors. They can be anything, because whenever you see 2 colors together, you're going to see them again in a different way later in the fabric. So don't worry too much about, is this the right color placement? Use the border to decide that. So pick colors B and D, that's going to be my chevron. Color C, that's going to be a really cool I-cord pop. Maybe your brightest color pop could be your color C to finish and frame your shawl. And colors A and B are the beginning. Those colors aren't so important because it's such a small section, but I chose this light gray purple as my color A and the brighter purple as my color B. So those start your shawl, but then you always see the colors differently in a different combination later on. So if you're in doubt, just arrange your 5 colors from light to dark and it's going to look fine. Okay, color A could be your lightest, and color E, that's 5, A, B, C, D, E, that could be your darkest color. So Aurora Cabin, if you don't have the pattern yet, you can still get it as an individual download on Ravelry or westknits.com, and it's in my Hiberknitting 3 book. And this month in December, if you're watching this video still in December, we have the Hiberknitting 3 print book. All the print books are 25% off at Stephen and Penelope, but we'll keep having this in stock in the new year. So if you want to collect a print book, there's a digital download code. I'll cover this one, but printed right on the inside cover, you can get all the PDFs from the book when you get the print collection. So it has the Aurora cabin shawl, the painting columns jacket, and you'll get so addicted to the slip stitch pattern, I think, during the knit along that you could knit some of the other Hiberknitting 3 patterns as well from the knit along. Ooh, camera's shaking. I got dogs playing. Stitch, come here, you help me model this hat. Ugh. So once you finish that slip stitch pattern, this might be too big. Yeah, we need a smaller size for you. Where's that cute head? There we go. You can make a little Aurora cabin hat with the same kind of slip stitch technique, and it's just a little bit thicker. Yeah, this one's my size. I might need to make her an Aurora cabin little sweater. Do you need a matching sweater, Stitch? Yeah, I can't leave you cold this winter. I need to knit them some new winter sweaters. So I might use some of these stitch patterns from the Hiberknitting 3 collection, and maybe they need to be puppified. What do you think, Stitch? Yours would be really quick. Hers would be really quick and easy. But the big boy, Brioche, you want to say hi? Ugh, everyone's going to be knitting along. He's going to be my knitting companion this Hiberknitting season, and we're working on some new projects because I already made this shawl. You going to model this, Brioche? So I already made my shawl. Next, I'm working on an Aurora cabin sweater. So early in the new year, like at the end of winter next year, we're going to get that beautiful slip stitch pattern again and the yoke of a sweater. So you could even use some leftover fingering weight yarns for that, but I'll give you all the details next year. But just a little sneak peek. We're going to see a little more of this stitch pattern next year. Are you happy about that, Brioche? Yeah. Yeah, you can use my shawls. They're like blankies. This is the most luxurious dog blanket. Are you spoiled, Brioche? Yeah, no, this isn't going to be his blankie. He has other chew toys and knits from like years and years ago. Sometimes I give him my old shawls and he turns those into blankets, but not this one. This one is a little bit too nice. So as you're sharing your progress in that Ravelry group, there's also Instagram. I love seeing all your hashtags, and we can use the hashtag HKAL 2022 as we knit along, HKAL 2022. And you can also use the hashtag Aurora Cabin Shawl so we can see all that progress. But yeah, stick with it. It grows really quick in the beginning, and it needs a little focus the very first time you do that slip stitch pattern. Just follow me stitch by stitch, making sure you're slipping the right stitches and they're traveling the right direction. And once you tackle that first section, it's the same techniques for the other 2 sections. And the rows just get longer, and I love that because it's more relaxing. You get accustomed to the techniques, and then you get to relax and go, oh, yep, I know how to do that. I did that before. Now I get to enjoy it for a little bit longer. And it's a large shawl, so this is the finished size. If you want to make it a little bit smaller, you could completely just omit that border and bind off early with any color. Do an I-cord bind off without that border. If you want it even smaller, I mean, you could bind off basically any time early. So that could give a final little, maybe a striped I-cord. That could be a beautiful smooth finish. But if you've got the recommended yarn and you want that big shawl, then go all the way with that chevron. It gives a really decorative, beautiful finish to the shawl. And one thing with my experience knitting this shawl was I didn't knit super, super tight, but I didn't knit really loose either. I kind of knit in between, but I just had a little bit of yarn left over. So if you knit a little bit looser than me, you might be using a little bit more yarn. So just to be safe, I might recommend knitting 1 or 2 stripes fewer in your chevron border. If you feel like you're running low on yarn, you might need to make your chevron border a little bit smaller. And another solution, if you're like, ooh, I don't know with those last rows, I really want those big chevrons, or I want to knit more chevron rows, then before you start the chevron border, you could introduce a 6th color pop to your palette. just to be extra safe and know that you could knit even more rows for your border. So rather than playing it safe, you could always sneak in another shade, or I want to put another little icy blue into my border to make sure I could make those chevrons even more repeats. But I did 2, 4, 6 garter ridges in my chevron border. When you're reaching your border, maybe you only want to do 4 or 5 garter ridges just to be safe. But yeah, I used a lot of yarn. I did have leftovers, but I didn't have like 20 grams left over. I had like 5 or 7 grams left over of my colors. So that's the big shawl. I'm really excited to see the other color palettes, and especially when you use the same kit as I did, if you change the colors and put them in a different arrangement, it's gonna look like a slightly different shawl. So that's gonna be cool to see. And I always love just seeing your stash busting and one-of-a-kind palettes. So these colors, Life in the Long Grass dyed these custom colors for us. And I was just so happy with the Aurora Borealis inspiration and that rustic cozy cabin palette. They just really nailed those winter color themes. But I have a lot of Life in the Long Grass, and I'm thinking about other warm color palettes. So when you're putting your colors together, I really like having contrast for this shawl. There's a dark color, a light, more neutral color, and some color pops. That gives a nice balanced, high contrast effect. But if you want like lower contrast, like something like this, or maybe these with like a little gray. Ooh, that could be nice. A little icy blue. What do I have here? Yeah, I would maybe put something like this. That would be a really nice light palette, not too high contrast. So it doesn't always have to be so crispy and stark in the contrast. It could be a little softer with lighter colors, and just know that the slip stitches will be a little more subtle, not so graphic. But I think that would be cool. Or getting in a dark color. Ooh, I really like that. So something like this would be a fun palette. You can always stick in the same color family, and that's always a sure way to know that the colors are gonna look good together, like all warm colors, and then light, medium, dark. I need a 5th color. Ooh, something like that could be really warm and fiery, but gray is always okay. Oh, that's always nice and cool. So neutrals with a pop, or all warm colors, or maybe all cool colors, like all blues and greens. Maybe something like this. You could even use like a self-striping yarn. You can really go wild with your stash options and just tailor it and go, what am I liking? Oh, I'm really liking these blues. So maybe this kind of color story. Icy blue, light gray. Do I need something dark? Maybe a dark blue, something like this, or a gray. I think this could be a really cool palette, more in the cool tones. So dive into your stash. If you haven't picked out a palette yet, you just need 100 grams of each color in fingering weight. And the total yardage, I used Life in the Long Grass singles, and there's quite a bit of yarn on there. So you need at least 340 yards of colors A and B. The most yarn you use is color C of the border. So that's something else also to think about. For color C, maybe choose that color to be the one that you definitely have the most yardage of. If you're working from your stash, working from leftovers, color C, ooh, you definitely need a full skein. Colors A and B I used a little less of, but 340 to 400 yards of each color. So when in doubt, round up. You know, if you have 400 or 420, 440 yards of each color, you should be good to go. But if you're playing it safe with your stash yarns, or not playing it safe, but if you're, stash busting and you've got your 5 colors, but they're not all full skeins, I would introduce a 6th color into the palette just in case, so that you know you have enough yarn to finish your shawl, especially those of you working from your stash. So. Can't wait to see where you take this shawl. I'm definitely inspired by it for the sweater that I'm working on. And all throughout January, we'll be knitting the Aurora cabin shawl. So share your progress on Ravelry, the HKAL group, and on Instagram, HKAL 2022 hashtag. And there's going to be some prizes in January too. So I'll announce those in the new year, but those of you knitting along, sharing your hashtags, posting your progress on Ravelry, I'll announce some fun prizes that you'll be eligible for by participating. So can't wait to see your shawls, and if you finish your shawl early, there's always a hat you can make to coordinate with it, or some of the other fun accessories and garments in the Hiberknitting book. So happy Hiberknitting season. This is our 3rd year knitting along, and it just gets cozier and cozier. So I can't wait to get inspired by you, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy Hiberknitting.